Hello and welcome back. Today I wanted to do a review of this saber, which is the Darksaber V2 from Pach Store. Now let me cover a couple of those things. Let me turn this off real quick. Cover a couple of those terms real quick. Darksaber is something that used to be very few and far between. There weren't very many models for the Darksaber before the Mandalorian series came out. That sort of popularized the Darksaber to the point that now there are a ton of them. Originally, I only knew of two. There was the Darksai from Kaizen Saber, which I did a review of, and then there was the V1 Darksaber from Pach Store. Okay, LGT came out with one that was just giant at one point, and then a few other companies have come out with Darksabers these days. Even Hasbro or Disney has a Darksaber version that they sell in Disney parks and online. So the Darksaber has been popularized now, but there are three different basic makes of the Darksaber. Okay, the Kaizen Saber was modeled after the Clone Wars Darksaber, which has these sort of flanges here on the end. Okay, the Clone Wars one looked a lot more like this, minus the Cthulhu etch. Then there was the Rebels version, and the Rebels version looked a lot more like this. The Rebels version has rectangles here instead of squares. This section is a little bit smaller, but the overall design of it is very similar to this, perhaps a little bit more angular here. The Pach Store V1 was made to look more like the Rebels one, and it has very flat angles to the point that these are hard rectangular edges right here and here. All right, and then there's the Mandalorian version. Now, the Disney version that you get in Disney parks and that you can get through the Black Series Elites, and also the Ebon Razor from Electrum Sabercraft, are very similar to the Mandalorian version, which has vents here and sort of a different overall design. So this one, the V2 from Pach Store, is kind of a mix between the Mandalorian one and the Rebels one, but it leans closer to the Rebels one. The Mandalorian one was where you ended up with this sort of smoother edges here as opposed to the hard edges. Alright, so for the V2, what they were doing was they were taking their V1 and they were trying to make it a duel-worthy saber, so a Darksaber that you could actually duel with. The V1, that would not have been recommended with all the hard edges that were on that thing. So that's what they were going for the V2. So let me talk about the hilt design on this, and then I'll talk about the blade options, and then we'll talk a little bit about the board and the features that you get with it. So the hilt design on this, this is no hard edges on the hilt itself. These are rounded and beveled, so this is actually really nice to hold. It holds a lot like a katana. It's about the same size and structure as a katana. The end cap down here is angular. It has sound vents here. The speaker rests right here. There are vents here, but I'm not real sure what those vents are for because the speaker rests down here. So all the sound's coming out through here. There are LEDs up in here on the board that show things like standby and charging, but you can't see them all the way down here in these vents. So I'm not real certain what the purpose of these vents is, but they're there and you can see all the way through them. The activation button is a single activation button. This thing is available empty and also with their Flight or Ultimate Works Light board. Eventually, I'm thinking they'll probably have this offered with Asteria or Profi, but right now, as far as I know, it's just empty or Flight. Okay, this has a data cable right there. This is not a standard USB. It is a bidirectional. You're starting to see more and more of these, and Oculus uses them, but it's kind of, I'm not real sure what it's called, but it's after the USB micro. They have this bidirectional USB that's a lot more like a lightning cable from Apple. All right, so that's what this is. All right, these two screws right here hold in the board. This screw right here holds the saber together. It's structural. I'll talk about that in a second. We've got this cross guard. This thing has some sharp edges on it, but the whole thing is actually powder coated. So the powder coating helps to cut down on sort of the abruptness of this edge. These corners up here are still pretty deadly, but the sides are not anything that's going to cut you. And then we have the top portion up here. Now the top portion, this is a structural screw. This is a set screw for the LED, and these are set screws for the blade. Now this thing comes as a baselit rather than a NeoPixel. Later I'm sure you'll probably see them as NeoPixel. The reason that a baselit is probably a good idea for a saber like this is because of the blade. The iconic sort of dark blades that the Darksaber runs, this is not the one that Pach Store sells. This is a Ripper Blades Black Blade V3. I'm a big fan of the Ripper Dark Blades option. This is where they started off with their products, and they're still some of the best at it. Pach Store does sell a similar blade. You can get similar blades from a lot of different makers. The Black Series one comes with a flat blade like this as well. Thing about it is that this blade is acrylic and it requires the light to shine up it. You can get neopixels of this, but in order to get a neopixel, you have to embed a neopixel strip inside of a flat acrylic blade, which is difficult and expensive, and they're very hard to come by because runs on them are limited. So having that baselit saber is probably a better idea on this one because it gives you more versatility on changing out the blade. The angle on this emitter is the same angle. Ripper uses this angle, the Darksai uses this angle. This was actually made with that angle for the Darksai blade or the Darksai saber, but it fits in this one just fine. So you're dealing with an angled emitter. So if you want it to fit right, your blade plug has to have an angle to it. All right. If you wanted to use something like a dueling blade, since this is a dueling saber, you can't duel with those flat blades. Even if it would hold up to the stress, which it won't, you'd basically be dueling with a sword, and people would have to be crazy to duel with you because the pressure would be all on an edge and it would hurt. But you can get dueling black blades like this that fit in here just fine. This thing has a standard 1-inch blade socket. All right, so other things about the structure on this. There's nothing that unscrews on this. Everything is held in by these Allen wrench screws here, and you have to unscrew all the screws in order to pop pieces off. So nothing is threaded except for the screws themselves. If you unscrew this one, you can pull off the pommel. You can't really pull out the speaker, but it's how you would get the board out if you were going to detach the entire board. These would allow you to detach the board. This screw right here, this screw right here, and this screw right here are screwed into a metal piece inside. You can see it in the gap right here, the small gap shining in there. There is a metal, basically plug, that's screwed in here and screwed in here and here that allows these parts to all stick together. This thing is just pressure set in the middle, but there's no wiggle on it, so this piece is pretty sturdy. My only grievance about this structure, when they offered this originally, there were screws right here in the side. With those screws in the side, it was much better of a seal, because with the screw here and here, you run into the same problem that Kyber lights have. When you have screws on both sides of something like this, you get some wiggle back and forth. And when I got this, I could actually take this top bit and I could clack it back and forth, which is not something you want to have happen. It was easy enough to rectify. What I ended up doing is I unscrewed these 3 screws, I took this apart, and I put a small piece of electrical tape on that internal piece right here. And just that little width of the electrical tape was enough to prevent it from wiggling. So now, very sturdy, no clack, or sits just fine. But I had to modify that in order to have that happen. All right, this screw right here, by the way, is very difficult to get to. So in order to get this apart, you take off this screw right here and pull it out. The LED is a plug and play. It's connected with a quick connect to the board, so you can unplug the LED if you want to have a better run at it and not worry about damaging your wires. Okay, after that, you have to take this piece off, and this piece is a tight fit. So you can tap it on the ground or whatever, but this piece does eventually come off. Then you can access both of these screws, take this off, and put that piece of electrical tape under there. All right, I don't know if that's something that is the case with all copies of this saber, but it was certainly with mine. All right, but after I got it sorted, it's very sturdy now, so I'm very happy about that. Okay, the board on this thing is the flight board, which is the new eco or budget board. So some of the features about that, it features 6 sound fonts. The one that you heard at the beginning of this video was the Previsla sound font, which makes sense because it's the Darksaber. Okay, there is also a Revan sound font, an Ahsoka sound font, a Luke sound font, an Obi-Wan sound font, and a Kylo Ren sound font. All right, so the way that this board works, you can switch those sound fonts out using this cable right here. You have to plug it into a computer when it's entirely off, switch the thing into standby mode, and then it'll come up and read as a drive. There is no SD card to take out of this. All right, once you do that, you can access the sound files, you can swap them out, you can change change some of the options if you want. You can even change the preset colors. But we have it in standby here. The battery, nearly impossible to get out of this without completely dismantling the saber. So this thing charges pretty exclusively through this little wire right here. One of the things about it is that there is an orange LED attached to the board that indicates that this thing is charging. That tells you whether or not it's fully charged or whether it's currently charging. With this hilt design, you're never going to see that LED. The flight board here, this is my flight saber. This uses the same board. Okay, this right here, there's a green LED right here that shows you when the thing is in standby or when it's on. The charging LED is up here. On this one, you can see it coming out from here if you have it plugged in, only if you have the pommel off. But with this one, you'll never see that charge cable or that charge light. So you just have to leave it plugged in for a while until you think it's been enough time, and then count on it being fully charged. All right, so that's how you charge it. To turn it on or to put it in standby, you hold down on the button. It says boot, and the light starts to flash. Now the speaker on this is a lot quieter than the speaker on the flight saber. So it's sort of an oddly shaped speaker, which I think might have something to do with it. But it's about as loud as a lot of the other stuff Ultimate Works makes. The other things that are using the flight board these days with circular speakers are actually louder. This one's back to the previous level of volume that you'd experienced with a lot of older, like the Nihilus sabers and the Revan sabers that they sold. All right, so here it is in standby. In standby, I can rotate the saber to switch through the sound fonts.
I'm a Jedi, like my father before me.
There's Luke.
You've never fought anyone like me.
There's Vizsla. Oh no, there's Revan, sorry.
I am no Jedi.
There's Ahsoka.
Hello there.
Obi-Wan.
I'll show you the dark side.
Kylo.
Hello there.
Oh.
I am no Jedi. Hello there. I'll show you the dark side. I claim this.
There we go, and back to pre-Vizsla.
And my rightful place as leader of Death Watch.
Now, you notice that twist mechanic, because you have to twist it rather forcefully to get it to actually register the font switch, it's designed to go both directions and cycle through. Because you have to twist it rather forcibly, that little tick at the end sometimes registers as the opposite direction. So it can be tricky to get from sound font to sound font. It's a little bit easier with this one because of this because of the oval shape of it. But you're still going to have a little bit of trouble navigating. Once you get to the sound font that you want, you hit the button. Pop the blade back in there. There we go. All right, now these sound fonts feature a smooth swing, accent swings, which they call hybrid smooth swing, which means that if I swing it fast enough, it'll register a more classic swing as opposed to the smooth swing sound. So this is smooth swing. That's the accent swings. We've got clashes. We've got blaster deflects. And we've got blade lockup. The blade lockup on this keeps going until I hit the button to turn it off. Okay, and then I hold it in to power down. One other feature on this, when the blade is on, I can switch color through that twist. I hold down the button. Alright, so I can hold down the button and twist to switch between the preset colors. Again, those colors can be modified in the files themselves through the cable. And then there's also a volume setting. By double tapping this, I can go to mute, low, medium, Hi. Alright, so a lot of these features I went over when I reviewed the lightsaber itself, so these are the same features there. You want to be sure to turn it off again if you're going to be having it around a convention, otherwise you're going to inadvertently find yourself switching fonts. Alright, so pretty decent saber, definitely duel worthy. I like the fact that it's got a handguard, so if you're going to duel, this actually comes in handy, though it will tear up your opponent's blades if it comes in contact with these edges up here. So don't duel against somebody who's, or if you've got a NeoPixel blade, don't duel against somebody who's got one of these things, or you're going to screw up your NeoPixel blade. All right, this part right here is a little bit longer than I'm comfortable with. You notice that in a lot of other Darksabers, that section is substantially smaller, but that's a design choice that they chose to make, making these things square instead of rectangular and extending this piece. It also moves the balance up a little bit. So in terms of spinning, this is a little bit top-heavy for a spinning saber. It's great for a dueling saber. It's really nice to hold, and it handles a lot like a katana, just a rather top-heavy katana. All right, so this is the Darksaber V2 from Pach Store. Hopefully this review has been of use to you. If it has, join me back for more, and I'll see you next time.